I want to explain one concept. Because before we get to the Parsha, just so I want to tell you one thing about Rosh Hashanah. We're on, I'll save that for the end. Let's start with the Parsha first, and then I'll tell you about Rosh Hashanah. I want to get there's one very important idea. Okay. We started talking about in Parshas Nitzavim. So we're on Perek Chav Tes, Pasuk Tes Zayin, 29:16. 29:16. So Moshe Rabbeinu is making this covenant with the Jewish people. It's on page, what is it? 1086, thank you. And then it says like this. Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to the Jewish people about being careful not to get involved with the Gentiles and with the pagans and with their idol worship. And he says like this, pick it up from 5 lines from the bottom. Ki atem yadatem es asher yeshavnu be'eretz Mitzrayim. You know that we dwelled in Egypt. Ve'es asher avarnu b'kerev hagoyim asher avartem, and how we passed among other non-Jewish nations. So first of all, there's a frightening thought here because we're in the 40th year. They've been out of Egypt for 40 years. 40 years. Think about what 40 years are. And Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to the Jewish people, there's still a concern that you are suffering from the Egyptian influence. That's 40 years ago. That's 40 years in the desert where they've seen miracles. They received the Torah. They've been eating man in the desert. They've seen the hand of God openly, blatantly. And Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to the Jewish people, you know what, listen, you know that we were in Egypt. And as a result of being in Egypt, 40 years ago in Egypt, remember I told you that Egypt was, they were the source, the root of idol worship in the world. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, and as a result of what you happened in Egypt, and we passed through the other nations, vatiru es shikutzehem v'esgilu lehem, you saw their abominations and their idols, eitz va'evan, wood and stone, kesef v'zav asherem, the silver and gold that was with them. So Moshe Rabbeinu says you're still under that possible influence of the Egyptian culture, and as a result of that, we have to be very concerned that you don't get sucked into it again. So the commentaries point out, well, you know, what is it that's going to attract the Jewish people? The idols are made out of eitz v'evan, wood and stone. But then you'll see that these non-Jewish nations, they have silver and gold, which makes it look like they're prospering as a result of their idols. In other words, what's your motivation to worship idols? Your motivation to worship idols may very well be just looking at the prosperity of idol-worshiping nations. Hey, these guys are worshiping idols and they're doing well. They got silver and gold, so that looks very attractive to us. The Moshe says, be careful. Now, we have to understand a little bit what is idol worship. What was the Gemara says that the drive to worship idols was so powerful. The men of the Great Assembly, the Gemara says, they had to daven to eradicate the evil inclination. The Yetzer Hara. They davened that the drive for worshiping idols should be something we cannot even relate to. We can't fathom what possible interest or what possible joy or pleasure is there in worshiping idols. Why would you even want to do it? It looks so stupid. You put an idol on the table, put a statue on the table, and you bow down to the statue. I say Buddha. Ever see a statue of Buddha? I refer to Buddha as the little fat guy who couldn't afford a shirt. And why would anybody want to worship that? So we can't possibly relate to it. But there are things that happen nowadays. Like people say, "What's heroin like?" Go have a heroin addict explain to somebody who's never used heroin what the sensation of heroin is. You can't explain it. You can't possibly. Why would you want to stick a needle in your arm? Right? What guy? Well, if you ever did heroin. Right, I imagine that if you ever did heroin, you wouldn't need anybody to explain it to you. The sensation itself is enough to make you say, hey, this is really good. Obviously there are certain problems down the line. But at the moment that you do it, it's obviously pleasurable enough. I had a woman, unfortunately, a woman told me, her husband, a long-time Balei Tshuva. They were living in my neighborhood. And it's a family that was struggling. They had financial issues, and they had other issues in the family. So we used to try to help them out. This lady said to me, her husband is a recovered heroin addict, and he has never found any satisfaction in life. He's become religious, and he's never found any satisfaction in life that was able to counteract that, was able to compete with that heroin addiction. So, Islam said, why would you want to do that? I mean, really, it messes up your life. And well, obviously, it's what do you call it? It's like asking somebody, what's skydiving like? Oh, what's skydiving like? It's like jumping up and down in your bed, but just a little different. I can't explain to you what skydiving is like until you experience skydiving, which I hope none of you have or will, right? But I see guilty smiles. But there's certain things. So what was idol worship? The answer is, if somebody pick somebody smart from history. I think of anything back of American history, which is obviously the only history of the world. When you think back on, Americans brought all truth to the world. Obviously, when you think American history, let's pick a Benjamin Franklin. He was always regarded. Right? He was the smart American, right? He had those little glasses, and he got himself on a $100 bill. That's a smart man, right? So if you ask Benjamin Franklin, imagine you're talking to Benjamin Franklin 250 years ago, and you tell Benjamin Franklin, one day, 200 years from now, there's going to be a box. And this box is going to convey images. And entire families are going to sit around mesmerized by this box. And this box is going to have the strongest possible effect on Western civilization. Even somebody smart like Benjamin Franklin will think that you're exaggerating. How could a box have images, and how could this possibly affect people and have people addicted where they have this box in every room of their house, including the bathroom? How could that possibly be? And if you looked at what television did to society, I don't know nowadays if anybody even watches TV, because now we're on to bigger and better things, but if at the time when television first came out, people were mesmerized and chatted. It affected everybody. The South Africans, I don't think South Africans had television until something like when did television come up? 1970, something like that. Way later. And you saw a difference in the South African society as soon as television hit. They held out for a long time. And then you saw a difference. South Africans used to be decent people, Nate. And then what do you call it? Then television hit. Right? Then television hit. And it changed the society. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable the change that came about in an American society, and so on and so forth. So there was a rabbi from Europe who escaped the Nazis. He was with the Mir Yeshiva. They ran across Europe and escaped. He came to America. You talk about a hardcore, massive Talmid Chacham, a big European rabbi who had bigger things on his mind than baseball and hot dogs. And he comes to the United States, and people are hawking about television. That's all they're talking about. Constantly talking about. So he says, what is this television? People are that. So he goes into a room, the guy's watching television. He said, what is this that they're making such an issue about? So what does he see? Just his luck. He sees a boxing match. A boxing match. Maybe, we don't have the air conditioning. Open the windows. At least open the windows and the doors so we get some we don't need the air conditioning. We get some cross ventilation. Thank you. So he sees a boxing match. So you can imagine this is a man. He's watching a boxing match, and all he's looking, and he says in Yiddish, and one guy's punching away at the other guy. He's looking at it. He's going, "Noch hazet, another hit, Getty's hitting him." He couldn't fathom, the American mentality. He just couldn't get past. Now, Benjamin Franklin would think we're exaggerating, and if anything, I'm understating it, not exaggerating. So, idol worship had a drive. There was some sort of drive to worship idols, which the men of the Great Assembly davened, and they were responded to, and a fiery lion came shooting out of the Holy of Holies. They said that was the Yetzer Hara of idol worship. Anything about that? You find anything ironic about that? A lion. A lion represents, the tough. It's strong. It's powerful. Right? A fiery lion that came out of the Holy of Holies. Yeah. What's the obvious question?
Why was he in the Holy of Holies?
What was he doing in the Holy of Holies? Right. What's the answer? What's the answer? What do you say, Ezra?
I was just going to ask, wasn't there like a fiery lion that took the korbanos as well?
There was on the Mizbeach, there was the fire was shaped like a lion in the first base of English. That's correct. The second base was shaped like a dog. It was a downgrade. A dog is generally not considered a very, very respectable animal. Can we open that door? Just open it or push it up. There's a thing on the bottom. I think either that or just wrench the door off its hinges. Whatever works. Thank you. So the answer is that there's a force and a counterforce. And the pasuk says, "Zelu mazeh asa Elokim." Everything in creation, in order to maintain free choice, God had to create parallels. So you have a Holy of Holies, but there's got to be the Holy of Holies it exerts such a powerful positive influence. It's like a positive and negative force. Don't you have positive and negatives in in batteries and in all these. There's got to be at the time that they eradicated. You know what disappeared from the world? What terminated? Prophecy. Because if you'd only have prophecy on the strong side and no Yetzer Hara, no idol worship, so then you've ruined the balance of free choice. So at the same time, it's all reduced. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that there's number one, there's the drive for idol worship, the natural drive, and number two, you may have a temptation because you see the gold and the silver that's with them. You may see the gold and the silver that's with the idols. Yeah, Yamir, go ahead.
So, if we do have nowadays idol worshippers, wouldn't that also bring that perhaps there's...
No, because the Gemara says that the only reason they're doing nowadays is because it's what's called minhag avoseim biyadehem. They're just following the tradition. It does not have anywhere near that same spiritual high or whatever the high was, whatever the drive was. It has nothing near it. It's more by rote. They're just doing something because that was a tradition. I had a friend who went to. He was a mashgiach. He was a guy from the Dominican Republic who became a mashgiach with the OU. So he traveled all over the world to various factories. A lot of kosher products, especially the emulsifiers and all the fires and whatever, all these other little chemicals and stuff. They come from factories all over the world. There are a lot of these factories, hundreds of them, scattered over places like China and India and that sort of thing. So this guy went to India to check out factories in India. So when he came back, I said to him, Moshe, did you see any idol worship there? In India, were there any idol worship? He said to me, Rabbi, if it moves, they worship it. That's what he said. There were everything, cows, rodents, it doesn't matter. If the idol worship, there is the concept is still there. And I have a friend who's a guy lives across the street from me, he was actually from India, a very big Talmid Chacham. And he said, well, when he grew up, he's from, what's it called? We used to call it Bombay. What do they call it now? Mumbai. I grew up, it's called Bombay. So he said, if you go to, even just going to the park, if you go to the park, you got to be careful that when you bend down to tie your shoes that you're not facing. There's so many idols there everywhere you go. There are idols. You can't even bend down to tie your shoes because it looks like you're bowing to an idol. He said it's all over the place. He said he grew up, it was all over the place. So there is that, but it doesn't have anywhere near the drive that it once had. It's more because, this is just what we do. Yeah, go ahead.
I heard that today's idol worship strength is with lust and promiscuity. Is that?
So what it says in the Gemara is, it's a good question. The Gemara says they then davened that if we're on a roll and we took away the Yetzer Hara for idol worship, because it was, if you read the Nach, if you read in the Tanakh, thank you, Mayor. If you read in the Tanakh, the greatest of the Jewish kings had trouble with idol worship. They were idol worshippers. Yerubim ben Nevat and all these other guys. Why? These people are on a massively high level. What happened? There's a tremendous drive. So the men of the Great Assembly, when they eradicated the drive for idol worship, they said, well, listen, we're doing well. Let's eradicate the drive for immorality. So it happened. And then they couldn't find a fertilized chicken egg anywhere in the country. Chickens stopped laying eggs. They said, well, this isn't going to work. So, if there's no drive for immorality, if there's no drive for it, mankind's going to cease to exist. So it was reinstated. But they said, well, why not just reinstate just part of it, the proper part of it? It doesn't work like that from heaven. It's an all or nothing proposition. And again, it has to do with the free choice. Well, but they did at least reduce the drive for incest. Right? For family relationships, that drive was reduced. That person can live with his mother and his sisters in the same house. And for the most part, unless they're from Tennessee or something, but for the most part, people could what do you call? There was that comedian who once said, you're a redneck if you're married 3 times and you got the same set of in-laws. But at a minimum, it was reduced. It was reduced to a certain extent. That's what the Gemara says.
But why was incest not?
That was somehow cut out. They were able to cut that out because that was apparently that's something that was anyway so rare that it doesn't really affect the balance. And all we got to do is look around the world today and we see that the balance has not been affected, right, by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, good question. Okay, now look on ahead for a second, and I'm only having mercy on you guys because it's right before Rosh Hashanah, which is why I'm not insisting the air conditioning go on because I have to be kind. So I'll let you guys go off easy. Take a look at Pasuk Yud Ches. Very interesting insight. So the Torah says, well, what if a guy comes along, and this guy, let's read the pasuk because there's a Rashi Tevis. He says at the bottom of 1086, 2 lines at the bottom, Pen yesh bachem isho isha, lest there be among you a man or a woman, o mishpacha or shevet or a family or tribe, asher levavo poneh hayomim Hashem. His heart is turning away from God. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem our God. Laleches lavod es Elohei hagoyim. He wants to worship those idols, those gods. Pen yesh bachem shoresh pore rosh vilana. Lest there be among you some sort of rotten root. How does he translate it? I always like the ArtScroll. A root flourishing with gall and wormwood. Don't ask me what gall and wormwood are, but it just means that he's a rotten shoresh, he's a rotten root. He's the cancer in the Jewish people. Maybe there's somebody lurking who's the source. He's got plans of making trouble. So if you take a look at those 4 words, shoresh pore rosh vilana, take a look at the first 4 letters. The shin from the word shoresh, pore is a pei, rosh is a resh, and a vav is a lana. Now you take those letters, shin, pei, resh, and vav, and you rearrange those letters, they spell out the word shofar. Right? Isn't that an interesting coincidence? Right around the week of Rosh Hashanah time, and there's the word rosh, by the way. The word rosh is right there in the pasuk. This is always right around Rosh Hashanah time that we read this pasuk. And what the commentaries point out is that you could be the worst person, and there's something that could turn it around for you, which is what? The shofar. The shofar. Now, what that means is that obviously we get to Rosh Hashanah. There's the call of the shofar. Right? The shofar blows. It's a mitzvah for us. By the way, people ask all the time, what should I be thinking about when I hear the shofar in shul? Right? It's a good question, because the shofar symbolizes many different things. The shofar, number 1, it recalls the binding of Yitzchak. Every holiday has like the one person who's the feature attraction. So, for example, on Sukkot, it's Aaron HaKohen, because the Sukkah represents the clouds of glory that were there. He's the star of Sukkot. And Moshe Rabbeinu is obviously the star of Shavuos, because that's when we got the Torah. The star of Rosh Hashanah is Yitzchak Avinu, because the shofar recalls, and you'll see in the davening, we constantly say, please recall for us the merit of the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. So, on Rosh Hashanah, we get to that binding. We constantly talk about it. And obviously, when Avraham Avinu needed to substitute Yitzchak, when God said, don't shecht him, so what did Avraham Avinu do? He looked, and there was a ram, and he took the ram and shechted it. So we blow the ram's horn as a way of recalling the Akedah Yitzchak. However, before you even get there, the first thought you should have when they're about to blow the shofar, does anybody know what it is? The first thought you should have when they're about to blow the shofar, I mean, it sounds very Litvish. It sounds like it's coming from a Litvak. The first thought is, I'm about to fulfill a command of the Torah. That's the first thought. Before you get off to the Akedah of Yitzchak, and before you get off, the shofar also symbolizes the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, where it says, V'kol shofar chazak mo. There's a sound of a shofar when they receive the Torah. That's all good and wonderful. But the first thing to think is, I'm about to fulfill a Torah command of hearing the shofar. That's the first thing. And they'll announce it in the shul, usually, that everybody should have in mind to be Yotzei the mitzvah of blowing shofar. So when they blow the shofar, as they're blowing the shofar during that time, a person should be thinking about, I want to do tshuva, I want to change. Now let's understand what's really going on in Rosh Hashanah. There are two major ideas here. Idea number one, so let's go to that shofar for a second. So the Torah says, maybe we could turn on the ear just for a few minutes. Right? Just you guys could do tshuva also. Right? You also need to be kind. Right? Just for a few minutes. Just one of them. Just one of them for a few minutes. Thank you. So the Torah says like this. Such an efficient air conditioner, you know, just really state of the art. So the Torah says what do you call it? So, and there's a strange medrash. Now listen to this medrash. When Avraham Avinu goes up to Shech Yitzchak, the medrash says that Avraham Avinu, the angel says, don't shecht him. The angel comes to Avraham and says, don't shecht him. The medrash says to Avraham, the medrash says, when you look at the medrash, the inside story, when he said, don't shecht him, so Avraham Avinu said to the angel, to the malach, he said, so should I strangle him instead? He said, no, don't strangle him. He said, well, should I make a small cut to draw some blood? He said, no, don't make a small cut to draw some blood. He said, so what should I do instead? He said, well, there's a ram. So Avraham Avinu took the ram, and he shechted it, and he skinned it, and he cut it, and he burnt it on the altar. Every step of the way, as he was shechting the ram, whatever he did to the ram, he said, let this be as if it's Yitzchak. Let it be as if I'm shechting Yitzchak. Let it be as if I'm shechting my son Yitzchak. As if I'm skinning my son Yitzchak. As if I'm cutting up my son Yitzchak. As if I'm burning my son Yitzchak on the altar. Every step of the way. That's what the Medrash says. Now there are two very big questions here. Question number one is, first of all, have you ever been in a situation, I'm sure you have in life, where there's a guy who, you know, you have a friend who always wants to come over to your house, and you don't really like this guy, he's kind of a nudnik, and you don't really want to invite him over. And then one day, you come over to him because you know that he's got alternative plans for the weekend. So you say, hey, Bob, why don't you come to my house for the weekend? He says, oh, no, I can't. I actually made plans. I'm going on a fishing trip, which is exactly what you're hoping to hear. And you say, oh, come on, Bob. No, you could come over. And he goes, hey, you know what? Okay. And you're like, oh, why did I go that extra round? You know, and you're kicking yourself. Why did you do that? Okay? Yeah, you've had that sort of situation where you've been over generous because you thought that you were safe. And then the guy calls your bluff. Yeah. By the way, according to halacha, you're not allowed to do that. If you know that somebody's going to say no, you can't invite somebody knowing he's going to say no just so you could look like you're being generous. That's called genevas das. You're actually creating a deception. It's a matter. Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. I know that this guy won't come. And so Dafka, this is when I go, hey, want to come to my house for Shabbos? Oh, no, I have plans. And I knew he has plans. And I'm only doing it so that now he could think I'm generous and I'm really creating and perpetrating a deception over here. That's called genevas das. You're not allowed to do that. You're stealing. It's a deception. Okay, without getting into that. Avram Avinu, the Malach says to him, don't shecht him. So Avram Avinu says, what, should I strangle? Avram says, should I strangle him? What if the Malach would have turned around and said, hey, great idea. You know, we didn't think of that up here. You know, can you imagine? And then Avraham Avinu comes home and he says to his wife, I got some good news and some bad news. The good news is they wanted me to shecht our son Yitzchak, but then they said no. Really? Yeah. But then I offered to strangle him and they said yes. And I just go, why did you have to say that? You know what? Could you imagine that conversation? Right? Well, what's going on here? What sense does that make? And then Avraham Avinu says, no, don't strangle him. He says, well, should I draw a little blood? Well, you got to, I mean, what happened over here? Okay, question number one. Question number two, so what does he do? He takes the ram. Let it be as if this is Yitzchak. Let it be as if this five does. This is Yitzchak. Burning it. There's one problem. It wasn't Yitzchak. It wasn't Yitzchak. So what is good to say? Well, let's pretend it's Yitzchak. Yitzchak did not look like a ram. Right? By any stretch, there were no similarities. No tzad hashava. There's no binyan av. Right? No, nothing about Yitzchak and a ram were similar. Didn't have horns. So what was going on here? So Rabbi Dessler explains, you see what happened over here was like this. Has it ever happened to you in life that, it certainly has happened to me on several occasions, where there's something I really don't want to do, like going down on a roller coaster, which I've done I think twice in my life, right? Now, I remember walking up, and you're with your friends, and they're saying, you know what, come on, Kaplan, stop being a chicken. Go on the roller coaster. And I forced myself to get up the ride to the roller coaster. I'm standing on the top, and the entire time, every step up, as I'm walking up and going up, every time I'm saying to myself, I really don't want to be doing this. And I've psyched myself up to do it. Now, if I get to the top, and I'm sitting in the roller coaster, if at that moment the guy would say, oh, sorry, the ride's stopped for the day, what would your first split second, what would your feeling be?
Regret.
There would be no, that would come right afterwards. My first thought, there would be a drop of some sort, a disappointment, even though I don't want to be doing this. I'll give you even a better example. When I was in college, back in Princeton, so I know I wasn't in Princeton. I just want to see if you're paying attention. I was actually in Chicago. So when I was in college, every instructor, every teacher, to a man or woman, every single one of them walked into the room. The first thing they said was, my name is Mr. Peters. Your grade will be based on this, that, or the other. Every single one of them. They introduced themselves and said what the grade is based on, which meant that I realized right off the bat that we weren't there for the education. We were simply there to get a grade. That was clear to everybody in the room, including the teacher. Now imagine, I'm there for a grade. You're in school, I want to get good grades because if I get good grades, I graduate and get a good job and can make more money. That's the purpose. That's the entire purpose. We're in a final exam. I'm taking a final exam. I want to get an A. I've studied 3 days for this final exam. And the teacher walks in and says, okay, everybody ready for the exam? Here I am. Teacher says, there's no exam, everybody gets an automatic A. What would for that split second, what would happen?
Disappointment.
Why are you disappointed? You wanted the A, that's what you're there for. The answer is that in life, there are situations where, for lack of a better term, you've psyched yourself up, you've pumped yourself up for a certain situation, and if it doesn't happen as much as you don't want it to happen, there's a letdown. Then intelligent thought takes over and says, well, listen, I got my A, that's all I wanted. But you'd walk out deflated. I get off that ride, that's roller coaster, I get off deflated. Right? True or not true? Totally true. Avram Avinu is given the hardest test any single human being has ever had in history. He has to go shecht his son. It's his only son. And it's not only a test, we look at the test as a father shechting his son. No father could slaughter his son. But it's not only the test of the present, of shechting his son, the difficulty, it's a test of the future. Because if he shechts his son, he has no more offspring. There's nobody else. This is his only son. He doesn't know he's going to have more. So it's not only a test of the present, it's a test of the future. And it's not only a test of the future, it's a test of the past. Because Avram Avinu has spent his entire life preaching against a pagan world that was involved in human sacrifice. And now he's going to take with one slice of the knife, he's going to wipe out his entire past. Because everybody say, what a hypocrite. But for you it's okay, but for us it's not. Well, Hashem told me. Oh, sure. Yeah, well, he told us also. How do you like that? Right? You're going to wipe out your entire future, the difficulty of the present, and a complete obliteration of the past. That's the difficulty of the test. And he's got 3 days to think about this, because God doesn't tell him. He says, start walking. He's walking for 3 days. And all of a sudden he says, okay, there's a spot. What do you think he's been doing for 3 days? For 3 days, he's been building himself up to get to a point where he knows that if I pass this test, I am going to move into a new level in my connection with the Almighty. I'm about to step up to a new level of my connection to God. And at the last minute, when he's all pumped to do this, and again, I'm using this word because I don't know any word to describe what Avram Avinu is feeling, but we would call it you're pumped up, you're psyched up, whatever it is, you're energized, and at the last minute you said, don't do it. So Avram, so should I strangle him? No. Should I make a cut? No. Why? Why does Avram, what his desperation is, he understands that when you're inspired, you have to take that inspiration and translate it into an action. And when he's told, don't even do that, so what am I going to do with this energy? Take the ram. Every step of the way, Avram Avinu is putting the same energy he would have put in, the same ruchni energy that he would have put into shechting his son and skinning him and cutting him up and burning him. He puts all that into the ram. That's what's going on. And what Rav Dessler explains is that if a person is ever inspired, when you're inspired to take a step forward, if you don't translate that inspiration into a concrete, tangible action, then the inspiration will leave and your level will drop to lower than it was before you started. That's what he says. Rosh Hashanah, this is the period of the year where there's a certain inspiration. We're all inspired. Person has to, now how long you have, what the time frame is, what's that window of opportunity for that inspiration, I don't know exactly. But it's where a person makes a commitment and goes, let's say a person decided, you know what, I'm going to get more serious about davening. Start now at Mincha. Start tomorrow putting on tefillin. I want to be more serious about my learning. Add another half hour to your day of studying Torah. Wherever I want to become a better person. I want to think more about people. Okay? Try to find out who's not well in the yeshiva. Bring them a meal. Do something to take that concrete action. That's what's going on by the Akedah. So when we're blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, what we're reminding ourselves is, what does it mean? We're calling, of course, we're calling into merit the Akedah. That for sure. But more than that, what we're doing is we're reminding ourselves that this is the moment of inspiration. Grab the moment. Do something with it. That's a reminder. Grab the moment. One of my favorite stories, by the way, Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, the Mir Yeshiva. And a young man came to him and he said to him, Rebbe, what should I be thinking about while the shofar is blowing? When I'm hearing it, what should I be thinking about? Rabbi Nosson said, think about other people. I love that story. I love that. Think about other people, the other people of the world. Maybe think about them a little bit. Don't just think about yourself. Right? I love that because we always think about, tefillin and mezuzahs. And, other people are part of our tefillin. Other people are our tefillin and mezuzahs also. Right? Think about other people a little bit, number one. Number two, what are we doing during this period of the year in general? So I want to tell you a very, very important principle because I think that we all grapple with this a little bit. Imagine the following. There's the Olympic high jump competition. Okay? So they're about to start the Olympic high jump competition, and the public announcer, he says, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you that the current world record holder is in our audience today watching the high jump. The guy who still holds the world record, it was set 20 years ago. The bar is 8 feet high. He's in the audience watching the jump today. So this guy turns to his friend. He says, I'm the world record holder? I mean, look at me. I can't even jump into bed nowadays. I once jumped 8 feet. I cleared a bar at 8 feet. So his friend says to him, listen, when you were in shape and you were focused and you had a goal and you were training and you were proper nutrition, you were able to clear a bar at 8 feet. Now, you're right. Now you can't even clear, not even clear off the table, right? In those days, you could clear a bar at 8 feet, okay? In the course of the year, what happens to us? You get to Rosh Hashanah, what's the pinnacle of the year? Where's the holiest moment of the year for most Jews? At Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. At Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, it's the end of the day, and we're trying as hard as possible not to think what we're going to break our fast on, because that we have already thought about earlier in the day. Let's see, it's going to be 3 slices of pizza wedged together, and open our mouth like a crocodile, to swallow it. Is it going to be like an ice cream sundae with, all right, we're human. But at Ne'ilah, we're really focused. At Ne'ilah, we're promising Hashem the moon, right? And then what happens? What happens at the end of Yom Kippur? What do you experience inevitably? Oh, I tell you one thing happens at the end of Yom Kippur. Your first thought is you hear that last shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. The first thought is, I could probably fast tomorrow if I really wanted to also. This wasn't so hard, right? Isn't that true? Isn't that true? We don't. We don't. But that's the first. Oh, by the way, what's the first thought at the beginning of Yom Kippur? Yeah, 5 minutes into Yom Kippur. Where are you 10 minutes before Yom Kippur starts?
Eating.
drinking water.
You're finished. Oh, there you are. You're drinking water. Eating, we've taken care of. Then you go into the kitchen and you drink. So everybody has their minhag. Their surefire method that you're not going to be thirsty. You drink 3 cups of water, 7 cups of water, 613 cups of water, whatever it is. And then what happens 10 minutes into Yom Kippur? Yeah. Well, it's going to be a dry one this year. You ever notice every year's a dry one? You ever notice that? Yeah. And then you're a guy who skips breakfast every day of the year. Every day you may be a guy who skips breakfast. Yom Kippur morning, you wake up, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I think I better call Hatzalah. It's all psychological. And the minute Yom Kippur ends, all of a sudden, I'm not as hungry, I'm not as thirsty, you're okay. So what happens is there's a quick drop. We're so inspired, and then, boom, there's a drop. Right? And it's almost with this, well, how come I don't feel like I felt in Nila? You know why? Because we're not meant to. That's why there's a Nila. Why doesn't Yom Kippur happen once a week? If Yom Kippur should happen twice a year. The answer, if it happened twice a year, wouldn't have the same effect as once a year. And Rosh Hashanah wouldn't have the same effect as once a year. So what's really happening is like this. Let's go back to that analogy. Right now, we're focused, as much as each person at his level, we're trying to get focused, Slichos, Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur. And what we do is we actually set the bar for ourselves. This is what I could achieve under ideal focused circumstances. And then what happens in the course of the year is drop, up, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. We bounce around till we get to the next Elul. And in the next Elul, again, we gear up and we get focused. And what the pinnacle is on Yom Kippur at Ne'ilah, and we push that bar up just a little bit. Then in the course of the year, but we come to the next Elul just a little bit higher. And what happens is in the course of time, 5, 10, 20, or 30 years, you eventually push that bar up so high, that bar has reached so high, through the constant growth, the constant progress, the bar has gotten to a point where in the course of the year, 20 years from now, when you drop, it'll be higher than your high point this year. That's the nature of the entire game that we're playing, gentlemen. That's the game. Is up, down, up, down, up, down. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back in the course of a lifetime. The greatest tzaddikim, the Chafetz Chaim and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and what do you call it, Rav Shach, the greatest tzaddikim you could think of, they didn't jump from one level to another just like that. There was Yaakov's dream ladder was one rung at a time. They're climbing up a ladder. And the Chafetz Chaim was not born the Chafetz Chaim. He worked, and he had his days, he had his rough day, better days, and eventually he became the Chafetz Chaim. That happens to every single one of us. A person who's focused, that's what we're doing this very year. And you shouldn't feel, I once asked my brother, I was a little kid, so we were on our way to shul. We took the break on Yom Kippur, we had just finished Shacharis, we're going back from Mincha and Ne'ilah and Mariv. And I was a little kid, I was probably about, maybe 11, 12 years old, something like that. I said to my brother, what's the schedule now? He said, well, Mincha is going to be about an hour, and Ne'ilah is going to be an hour, then there's going to be 10 seconds of shofar blowing, and Mariv is going to be less. And I remember my brother telling, Mariv, we just spent the whole day davening, and then all of a sudden they blow shofar, I haven't even got my siddur open, and we're off to the races. Okay, that's all part of it. We're back into the regular routine. We're trying to be as good as we can, but you have to realize that it's a process of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. All right. Okay, so everybody should have, for those of you I don't see before Rosh Hashanah, you should have Ksiva v'chasima tova. Pace yourselves during davening. Pace yourselves. It's a long, challenging 2 days of lots of davening, lots of shul. Pace yourselves. Don't expect every word to be perfect. Go through it, daven. Try to enjoy the davening and enjoy the day. All right.